Joining us now is Harvard law professor Alan Dershowitz. He is considered one of the best criminal lawyers in the world and Israel's single most visible defender, having won the Begin Award of Honor this past December. A Newsmax contributor, he is the author of hundreds of published articles and 27 fiction and nonfiction works, including The Case for Israel and Rights from Wrong. And Professor Dershowitz, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, President Obama used very strong words recently to persuade Iran against developing nuclear weapons. He said, American policy is not to accept a nuclear Iran and that the military option remains on the table. Subsequently, you wrote that you believe the president has turned the corner on Iran and that anyone who claims he is weak on Iran or anti-Israel should reconsider. Why should we believe that the president is sincere about getting tough on Iran and protecting Israel?
I think it's in the president's best interest and in America's best interest to make sure that Iran does not develop nuclear weapons. If it was only to protect Israel, I'd have my reasons for doubt. As Elie Wiesel once said, the lesson of the Holocaust is always believe the threats of your enemies more than the promises of your friends. But I think it's in America's self-interest, and I think that the president has come to realize that. It's also in his self-interest historically. He does not want to go down in history as the Neville Chamberlain of the 21st century. Neville Chamberlain was a great prime minister. He brought health care. He brought widows and orphans relief, but he's only remembered in history for not having recognized the evil of an armed Nazi Germany. And I think that this president doesn't want to go down in history as having failed to prevent the greatest evil of the 21st century, a nuclear-armed Iran, from developing nuclear weapons.
Now, you recently told a Jewish audience in Miami to vote for whoever you like, whether Democrat or Republican, but make sure that every candidate that you support is against a nuclear Iran and has pledged to do his best to prevent it. You have said publicly now that you will vote for President Obama. How come?
Well, I keep my mind open as to who I'm going to vote for until I see who the opposing candidates are. Mitt Romney is somebody I know and have worked with when he was the governor of Massachusetts. I never make a decision as to who I'm going to endorse until the field is complete. I am a liberal Democrat. I am a Kennedy, Clinton, liberal Democrat. I generally vote Democrat. I don't always. I voted for Bill Weld when he was the Republican governor of Massachusetts. I hope to vote for Obama. But I must see whether or not he keeps his promise, which I assume he will, to make sure that we do not try to contain an uncontainable Iran, but rather prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. That will be a key element in my vote, and I believe the vote of many Americans, regardless of their religion.
So you are open to voting for the GOP candidate, potentially?
Always open to voting for any candidate. I will vote for the best candidate, the one who's best for America, the one who's best for the world, the one who's best for peace, the one who has the values that I support, which are generally liberal values. I care deeply about women's rights. I care deeply about the rights of people without regard to sexual orientation. I care deeply about the separation of church and state. All of these issues will impact my final vote.
Alan, can you detail for us in very specific terms what your analysis is of President Obama's policy on Israel?
Well, I think that President Obama supports Israel's security. President Obama disagrees with Israel's policies on settlements on the West Bank. I also disagree with some of Israel's policies regarding settlements on the West Bank. I've been critical of Israel's civilian settlements since 1973. I would personally like to see a settlement freeze, which brings the Palestinians to the negotiating table, or doesn't bring them. Let the world see who's at fault for not bringing about peace. I believe the Palestinians bear 98% of the blame for there not being peace. They could have accepted the Clinton-Barak parameters back in 2000-2001. If not for Yasser Arafat's untimely death, untimely in the sense of he had only died 4 years earlier, we'd have peace in the Middle East today. But Arafat single-handedly scuttled peace. So I think that I agree that Obama should be somewhat critical of Israel's settlement policy, but as long as he supports Israel on security matters, which he has done so far, and as long as he really maintains his commitment and the commitment of the United States to making sure that Iran does not develop nuclear weapons, I feel very comfortable about his support for Israel.
Okay, GOP candidates Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich have pledged their support of Israel. What is your assessment of their positions on Israel and the Iranian nuclear threat, and would they be better than Obama at protecting Israel and confronting Iran?
One can never be sure who will be better. For example, President George W. Bush loved Israel deeply from the depth of his heart. I was with President Bush in Israel, celebrating the 60th anniversary of Israel. And I can't imagine anybody being more committed to Israel. But he made a terrible mistake, in my view, that is going to war in Iraq and keeping a large army in occupation in Iraq did not serve Israel's interests. Sometimes good intentions don't manifest themselves as positive results. I'm thrilled that the issue of Israel and Iran has become a bipartisan issue, that all the Republican candidates, with the exception of Ron Paul, support Israel and support preventing Iran from developing nuclear weapons. The Democratic candidate obviously does as well. I don't want to ever see Israel become a partisan issue or an ideological issue. I want to see the consensus in support of Israel and against Iran's nuclear armaments remain a consensus issue.
Okay, well, you have said an Israeli strike on Iran would amount to self-defense and that Iran has taken enough actions to justify a military strike in response. Secretary of Defense Panetta said an Israeli attack on Iran could take place in a few months. Is a strike on Iran by Israel inevitable? And if so, in what time frame? Do you think that Israel would go it alone, or would the U.S. provide support?
Well, I hope Israel does not have to go it alone against Iran. Israel would have a perfect right to. Iran is already at war with Israel. It has blown up the Israeli embassy. It has attacked Israeli ambassadors. Its agents have tried to kill other Israeli ambassadors. These are acts of war. Iran has armed Hamas. It has armed Hezbollah. It has sent rockets to Israel's enemies that have killed Israeli children. Israel would have the perfect right to retaliate, and Israel doesn't retaliate by killing ambassadors. It retaliates by striking at the nuclear capacity. But Iran's threat is well beyond Israel. It threatens all the Gulf states. It threatens Turkey. It threatens Southern Europe. It threatens the United States through terrorism. So I would hope that the world together, led by the United States, would assure that Iran never develops nuclear weapons and that Israel does not have to do it alone.
Let's turn to the war on terror. In the wake of the Quran burning and that soldiers' rampage that killed 16 in Afghanistan, the Taliban broke off peace talks, and Afghanistan's President Hamid Karzai wants international troops to pull back now. Should we pull out troops even earlier than planned? And along those lines, was pulling out of Iraq the right thing to do?
First of all, we should never listen to Karzai. How dare him lecture us when the Afghans have murdered so many American soldiers in cold blood, planting explosive devices. You don't judge a country by the way one crazy soldier, pressured by all the exigencies of war, what he may have done. You judge a country by what we do to that soldier. We're putting him on trial. He has his own lawyer now. There will be a full trial and a full opportunity. The same thing with the Quran. It was a well-intentioned accident. It doesn't reflect American policy. We're not anti-Muslim. How dare Karzai lecture us? We should do what is in our best interest. We should prevent the Taliban from emerging again as a terrorist threat to the United States. But we are not there to do the bidding of Karzai or the Afghan people.
You recently stated that you're declaring war on the liberal George Soros-financed website Media Matters for America over its depiction of Israel. There have been reports that White House staffers had regular meetings and calls with Media Matters on campaign strategy. You've said that you plan to make this a re-election issue for President Obama. Can you update us on exactly where things stand right now and what, if any, response that you've received from the White House or George Soros?
Well, it's gotten much worse. Media Matters has doubled down. MJ Rosenberg has now said that his only response is to tell me, quote, to go to HELL and to urge my students to picket my classes, as if the students would listen to him. But he's worse than he's ever been. He said that to accuse AIPAC of dual loyalty is to accuse it of one loyalty more than it has. In other words, he accuses AIPAC of being disloyal to America. He accuses people like me of being Israel firsters. Look, I turned down Israel's request to serve as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations. Prime Minister Netanyahu offered me that job because I'm an American. I support America. I don't have dual loyalty any more than any hyphenated Americans, Irish Americans, Italian Americans, Greek Americans. I'm a Jewish American, and I certainly have love for Israel, but I'm an American first. I support America. I make my decisions based on principles that I learned as a child. My grandparents chose America. How dare M.J. Rosenberg accuse us of being Israel firsters? And worse, he applauded bigotry and anti-Semitism by Helen Thomas. He said she ought to be saluted for saying that Jews should get the hell out of Israel and go back to Poland. He saluted her rather than condemning her. He has defended Ahmadinejad. This is Media Matters, and the tent of the Democrats isn't wide enough to include the bigotry of Media Matters, and I think that the White House has to clearly disassociate itself from Media Matters. Now, since I've spoken about this, my information is the White House has had no communications with Media Matters. They have not been invited to the White House. So I think we're seeing statements of mine and others having some impact. Whether we'll see the president formally disassociate himself the way he did from the Reverend Wright, and that was essential to him getting elected, I hope he will do that.
Let's turn to civil liberties. The Patriot Act gives the U.S. government broad powers that cut across a citizen's right to privacy. What is your view on this controversial act?
Well, you can't really give an opinion on the Patriot Act. The Patriot Act is this thick. Most of the senators and congressmen who voted for it hadn't read it at the time they voted for it. There's some very good things in the Patriot Act. There are some very essential aspects that I would have voted for as a civil libertarian, that I support, and that I suspect even the American Civil Liberties Union supports. But there are things in it that are very dangerous. The ability to access library records of people and what they've read. It's a smorgasbord. And what people have to do is look at the act and deconstruct it and take it part by part and say, this we agree with, this we disagree with. Some parts are good, some parts are bad.
Now, you've been a human rights advocate for many years, yet you also condone the use of torture in the war on terror.
No. Let me be very clear about that. I do not accept torture. I believe it happens. And I think if we ever had a situation, I don't care who's the president, where a ticking bomb was in the harbor of New York or Washington or Palm Beach or Miami, and we knew we had 48 hours to stop that bomb, nuclear weapon, from going off and endangering the lives of hundreds of thousands of people, and we captured one of the terrorists who knew where the bomb was, every single president would authorize whatever it took to stop that bomb from going off. What I've said is, if we're going to do it, let's get a torture warrant. Let's do what the New York Times has recently advocated for targeted killings. Let's have a warrant. Let's require a judge to pass on the need. So the decision is not made just by a local CIA agent on the ground or even by the President of the United States. It has to go through a judicial process. There has to be affidavits indicating what the information is and how we know the information, so that, for example, when we authorize the targeted killing of an American citizen, which I think is justified if the American citizen has become an enemy of the United States, is involved in ongoing terrorism, I would agree with the New York Times that we should have a judicial process identifying what evidence we have against that American, why we think he is an immediate threat of terrorism, why we can't arrest him. I would apply the same analysis to targeted killing as to torture.
Yeah, there's a huge moral and legal discussion centered on the use of targeted killings for both U.S. citizens and international terrorists. When, if ever, is targeted killings legally and morally justified in your view?
First of all, targeted killing is much better than untargeted killing. So let's understand how that term should be used. Targeted killing means you focus specifically on the 1 or 2 or 3 people who are about to engage in terrorism against the United States, and you can't arrest them, they're in faraway countries, and you prevent them, and the only way you can do it, from attacking the United States by killing them. That's better than dropping bombs all over the place and just killing everybody in the area. So the alternative is often between targeted killing and untargeted killing. As between the two, targeted killing is much more protective of civil liberties. It should be used only against ongoing terrorists who are in the course of preparing for terrorist attacks, when it's impossible to arrest them and when we can do it without having too much collateral damage, that is, too many uninvolved civilian people killed in the process. Those are the 3 rules.
Last question, Obamacare. The Supreme Court will be hearing arguments on the individual mandate pretty soon. What is your legal opinion of the situation, and will Obamacare be overturned?
Predicting the future is very difficult. I think it was Yogi Berra who once said prediction is very hard, especially about the future. So predicting Supreme Court decisions these days means predicting the vote of one person, basically Justice Kennedy, who's the swing person. Pretty clear that there will be 4 people voting to uphold Obamacare, and it's not so clear whether there'll be 4 people to strike it down. But it might very well be a 5-4 decision. If I had to bet widows and orphans money on the outcome, I would say that I would bet on it being upheld, though perhaps in a close vote.
All right, Professor Alan Dershowitz, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.